Tonight we're starting a new series, and what I want to look at is what does recovery look like realistically? And over the years I've dealt with many clients who come into recovery and they have all these unrealistic expectations about what recovery is going to be like. They think there's a magic bullet somewhere, they just got to find it, and then they'll be magically cured. They think it'll be easy, they think they just do certain steps, they'll be fixed and never struggle again, and on it goes. And so part of what I do, and it's not always the fun part, but I have to try to paint a realistic picture of recovery, and it's a lot of work. I don't know much in life that requires more work than recovery and dealing with trauma, but I say that not to discourage you because I think there's a ton of hope. And there's a lot of hope if people will do what they need to do. So one of the things I want to do is come at this recovery topic from a whole bunch of different directions, so that each week you'll get a little different part of recovery and hopefully understand it just a little bit better, so that gradually a bit of a roadmap will come into play in your mind, and the encouragement and hope to begin this journey, which I think is well worth the effort. So tonight I want to come at it from a perspective that talks about 7 levels of change that are required in recovery. And I do this because a lot of people come in and think they only got to change one thing, and then they're going to be okay. So these levels basically are going to go in the order that I'm going to present them, but they don't necessarily have to go in that order. But you're going to find it's kind of like layers of an onion. You get through one layer, then you get to the next, and it just gets deeper and deeper, so that each layer takes you to a more difficult part than the one before. And eventually you get down to the core. So we're going to start on the outside and work our way to the core. And it'll give you a great big picture about what is involved in needing to be changed in recovery. So the first one is you can't get recovery unless you have some abstinence. And that's the first goal, is to be able to stay clean and sober. Now, I always feel the need to add this. People who are really serious about recovery, they do have relapses. That doesn't mean they go back to zero, that they didn't learn anything, that they messed up, and nothing was accomplished. What my goal when a person relapses is, what can we learn from it so we don't repeat it? So, as you work towards abstinence, you might have some slips here and there. Don't see that as a total failure or the end of the world or you can't do this. See it as an opportunity to learn so that you have a greater probability of getting this abstinence. So you can learn some stuff, but what you're going to find is this. If you keep slipping, you're only going to grow to a certain point, then stop. So the abstinence does become important at some time if you want to continue the healing, growing journey. Second thing, you're going to begin to realize you have to change situations in your life. And what I mean by that is this. Your old life, party life, spending time with buddies at the bar, doing the things that you did with using friends, that's got to change. Most people realize they can't continue to go to bars and parties and expect to stay clean and sober. They have to begin to develop new situations, new circumstances, new locations, new people. They got to replace the old stuff with new. And for many people, that is a huge change. Because it's like everything you used to do, you can't do anymore. You have to now start to replace it with new activities in new locations with new groups of people. And that can be an overwhelming feeling type of change because it's like everything is going to change. But that's only layer 2. The next one, we get into our behavior changes. We teach all the time that relapse is a process as well as an event. So the event is when you pick up. The process is the behaviors before the event that fall like dominoes. So you could have, let's say somebody really pisses you off, and all of a sudden your anger goes where your anger goes. Then the dominoes start falling. So next you could go and you could become super negative, criticize everything, find fault with everything. Then you have self-pity. You go on the pity pot and have a little party. Then you start to isolate. And then you start to lie. And then you start hanging around with old friends or checking them out on Facebook. And then you pick up. So it didn't just happen in a day. It was a process. And so what you begin to realize is I'm not just changing using to not using. I'm changing lying to being honest, isolating to meaningful relationships, negative thinking to beginning to look at life accurately. I have to change all kinds of behavior. So that's another major overhaul for a lot of people. Because if you spent your life in survival mode from complex trauma, that means you spent your life lying in order to survive. You spent your life isolating in order to survive. But now those very things that kept you safe from the trauma as a younger person, now those very things are leading you to a relapse. And so you begin to realize, I got to start changing from my old survival behaviors to new skills. I got to learn new tools, which include new behaviors. And that is absolutely necessary in recovery. So then the next layer is you got to start changing your thinking. So I don't know if you ever thought about how much your brain affects whether you stay clean and sober or get healthy or not. So a lot of things that you have in your brain that you might not even realize is you tell yourself lies all the time. When you're stressed out, your brain says, the truth about this situation is you need a holiday, so let's relapse. And you have to be able to say, no, that's not the truth, even though it feels like it, that's a lie. And then when you make a mistake and you start saying, I'm a loser, I can't do anything right, I might as well give up, it's useless. You have to say, whoa, that's a lie. And if I follow that lie and keep beating myself up, that takes me back into old behaviors and that takes me to a relapse. So I have to begin identifying the lies that I believe about myself, about happiness, about life. Because if I don't change those lies to the truth, I'm never going to make it. Then the next thing that happens with people coming out of complex trauma is you have this, if you're old enough to remember, an 8-track tape. Now you got to be really old to remember that. But they are continuous loops. So you would get to the end of the tape and you didn't have to turn it over. It'd just go back to track 1 and start all over again. Okay, so for your young people, you can go check that out on Google and find out about it. But here's what I want to say. If you grew up in complex trauma, where nobody had time for you, where you got abandoned, where you got criticized, where you got abused, you were made to feel that you were the problem. And that you weren't good enough and that you weren't lovable. And you were told things that were very hurtful. And you put those in your brain in an 8-track cassette tape. And that plays now every time you do something. And you go, you're useless, you can't do anything right, you'll never amount to anything. The world would be better off without you, and you start playing the tapes. And that you don't even have to think about consciously. It just happens subconsciously. But what I want you to realize is I've never seen anybody stay clean and sober who keeps playing those tapes. Now, what many people think is they're powerless to stop those tapes. I want you to understand, those tapes are powerful because they have been reinforced and reinforced for years, but you are not a little child anymore. You are a big person who can say, no, I don't have to keep saying that to myself. I can stop that tape. I do have the power to do that. And that can be huge. Next thing that happens in your thinking is we develop unrealistic expectations about life, about recovery, about people. We expect everybody to treat us perfectly. We expect everybody we meet to be perfect. We expect recovery to be a breeze. You realize what you just set yourself up for? To be mad all the time. To feel sorry for yourself all the time. To think life gave you a dirty deal all the time. When it's your expectations that are out of whack. And so you have to go and look at that. And then our brain has a part that remembers the greatest moments of our life. The greatest pleasure times. So as soon as life starts getting a little rough in the here and now, that part of our brain goes back to the euphoric aspects of using a long time ago. And it gets us starting to think about that and about how tough recovery is. And it ignores the bottom that we were at. It ignores all the damage and hurt we've done. It just starts to make relapse sound like the best idea in the whole world, and recovery the worst idea in the whole world. So your brain, what I want you to see is, it has constant wars, one part of your brain with another part. They are fighting all the time. One wants to do the right thing, the other wants to do the wrong thing. And that's part of the battle, is learning to deal with that stuff. And then the last part of your brain is that good old limbic, emotional part of your brain, the child brain, that gets triggered by fear and anger and embarrassment and depression and all of those things. And when it gets triggered, it just goes crazy with intensity and power. And that messes up a lot of people. So, the fourth layer of this onion, you got to change a lot of behaviors. You got to change a lot of stuff in your life and who you hang around with, what you do. You got to change your thinking. Next one. And this starts to get to the more painful part of what's got to be changed. So I hope what you're seeing is you're changing your external world, but you're changing your internal world. You're changing your external world about where you go, what you do, but you're changing your thinking, your emotions. Every part of you has to change because every part of you has been affected by complex trauma and addiction. So the emotions. Letting yourself feel. We just did a little series on painful emotions. You have to learn how to identify your emotions and know what's going on inside of you. You have to be able to start talking about your feelings and processing them, and then learning how to deal with them is very important. And then you have to catch yourself, because you have this tendency subconsciously to start disconnecting from your feelings because you don't like feeling. And as soon as you start disconnecting, you usually end up making some bad decisions. And then you have to realize that a lot of the decisions you make in life are based on how you're feeling. You're stressed, you're angry, you're lonely, you're depressed. All of those set the dominoes falling. And so I need to be aware that these have to be dealt with. Even though emotions make life feel messy, if I don't deal with them, they will start the dominoes and I'll never get healthy or stay clean and sober. So the emotional stage, next level, relationships. So now we're back to our external world. So we're intellectual beings, we're physical beings, we are emotional beings, but we're relationship beings. And I think one of the toughest parts of recovery for most people are the changes in this area. that you have to begin to cut some people out of your life. Hopefully not a whole lot, but there probably will be some that you have to cut out of your life. Because to allow them to stay in your life is going to keep you sick. And it will keep you never growing it'll keep you in all your pain. That means then you're going to have to learn to set boundaries with people. And that's not easy, especially if you're afraid to say no to people, especially if you're afraid of people not liking you. But you have to say, hey, I'm worth fighting for. I'm worth investing in, and I have to set some boundaries because these people aren't good for me. Where I'm at right now, I am too vulnerable, and I have to protect the fragile me. Then, your families. Some of you have supportive families. Most of you don't. And so most of you have to figure out how in the world do I have a relationship with my family that is either somewhat sick or toxic? Because if I don't figure that out, they keep dragging me into their stuff. And every time I get dragged into their stuff, I get messed up. That is really hard, but it is so important. And then, what you just did is cut out pretty much everybody in your life. So now you're all alone going, now what? Now you got to build some healthy friendships. And you go, wow, that's too hard. So you want to know what a lot of people do? They go back to their family. Because it's too hard to sit alone and have patience to build new friendships. Let's just go back because I'm lonely. And then they're messed up again. And so part of recovery is realizing I have to sit in a bit of loneliness for now and then put my energy into starting to build healthy relationships. And you don't get that overnight. That's a bit of a journey that you have to do. Now, the next thing people do is go, okay, I'll get into healthy relationships. Anybody want to date me? Here's my phone number. I'm available. Now you got all kinds of what you think are healthy relationships. So be careful around the romantic relationships. Because that's where people go when they're lonely, if they can't go to family, and they're tired of waiting, of building friendships slowly. And that'll mess you up big time. And then you have to learn how to be a parent to your children in a healthy way. And they're probably already affected by stuff that you've done. They've got their own complex trauma. And so part of your journey is learning how to help them with their stuff, keep working on your stuff, heal the damage that you've done. And that takes a lot of learning. And then we talked about lonely. We didn't quite get to horny, but that's the part that we're getting to now. Everybody in recovery, believe it or not, has to deal with their sex drive. And it's loneliness will kill you, or the horniness will. And if you don't deal with it, you're messed up. Okay, so that's 6 done. Number 7. So you see, we've started on the outside and we've been working in. And now the final one, which a lot of people don't see right away in recovery. But what you're doing in recovery is looking at your deepest core beliefs. And you're saying, what do I believe about happiness? What do I believe will make for a satisfying life? What do I believe about how life should operate as far as children, relationships, employment? And you're going to your core. And you're saying, have I been building my life on lies at a deep level? So a lot of people say, happiness is being my own boss and doing whatever I want to do. Well, you tried that, and that wasn't happiness. That ended up in misery. You thought it was going to give you freedom. It led you to become a captive to your dark side. And so now at your very core, you got to say, I got to rethink life. I got to rethink what makes this world work in a healthy way that leads to happiness. Because I've been following the wrong roadmap. And I got some deep thinking to do. And then you're really saying, I have to be willing to look at every piece of my life, everything I've built my life on. Is it a reliable, strong foundation, or is it a weak foundation? I got to look at my emotions, my thinking, my relationships, my behaviors, my friendships, all of that. Else I could be in trouble. So bottom line, you got to change everything. If you hadn't figured that out yet, where you're going. So that's why a lot of people say this is too hard. And I don't know if I want to do it. So you got an option. And it's called that fork in the road. So down one road at the fork in the roads, it is, well, just relapse. And you go, no, I know where that road ends up. And then the other fork in the road says, I got to do hard work. I don't like that option either. Is there a third road somewhere you're not telling me about? But that's where you're stuck. And so you can sit at that fork in the roads for a while, but if you sit there too long, do you guess what road you automatically go down? The relapse road. And so at some point, you have to say, really, I don't have any viable option except to work hard. Because nothing else works anymore, so I might as well buckle down and do it. And hopefully, you'll do that, and you'll find it very rewarding. Now, I got to add one thing. Let's say you decide I want to change. So I put that little diagram up there for you. So picture yourself back in addiction. So if addiction never got worse and worse and worse, you'd still be an addict. And so what caused you to change as you were going along in your status quo of I'm an addict and I love it, is it got worse. And it got very painful. And pain makes us think, maybe I need to change something. And so that's what pain did. And so now people make changes and life gets better. And they go, great, this is fantastic. I'm so glad I gave up drugs and alcohol and I'm living a clean life. But they're not prepared for what happens next once you start to change. And that's where it starts to feel like it's going downhill. It starts to feel like your life is getting worse again. So let me take you to some of the things that will begin to happen as you start to change. So the first thing is, all of a sudden you're entering unknown. Nobody told you how to live in this new way of life. You've never been in this new way of life before. And now you're going into unknown. And what happens when your brain hits unknown? It goes, something bad's going to happen. It always does. So let's just sabotage. Because we're going to screw up anyways. Then the next thing that happens, the more healthy you get, life has less and less chaos and drama. And then you go, this is boring. This recovery is dull. So let's have a bit of excitement. And so let's sabotage that as well. And then all of a sudden you're working with people who are 40 and they act like 40. You're 40 and you act like 10. And you're hanging out with them and all of a sudden you're embarrassed and self-conscious and insecure. And you think, I bet you all these people just are judging me, and they're thinking I'm a loser, and they don't want a friendship with me. Well, what's the point? And you give up. And then, when you were in your chaos, at least you knew what to do. You kind of felt in control, but now you're in this brand new life, and you feel out of control because you don't know exactly what to do. And then, I always picture a little kid that's going to go and dress up like dad. So they go in dad's closet and get out his suit. And then they come out and it's so baggy and it's hanging off of them. I think that's what a lot of people feel like in recovery is this doesn't feel right. This is awkward. This feels like it belongs to somebody else. I don't know if it fits. So let's quit. All of that happens. And then all of a sudden, you don't have your way of medicating all your emotions. And you start feeling guilt and sadness, some fear, some anxiety. Wow, if this is what change does, I feel worse. What was the point of changing? And then, now you got to grow up and be responsible. You mean I got to get out of bed every morning at 7 and go to work and pay my bills on time? What's up with that? I want to go back to being that 10-year-old again. So what you begin to realize is this recovery and change is making more demands of you and calling for deeper commitments and becoming a responsible, reliable person. And that can feel a little bit restrictive. And we don't like that. And then you're going to get your family or your friends that say, we like you the way you used to be. We don't like the new you. And you get pushback. You even get opposition. You get them saying, you think you're better than us now, do you? And they give you all of that stuff. Or after all we've done for you, now you don't want to hang around us because we're too sick? Who do you think you are? And all of a sudden, a lot of people aren't liking your change anymore. And so that's not a whole lot of fun. And then if you come to React or Finding Freedom and listen to me, you realize, I got a boundary issue. So you say, I'm going to work on my boundaries. And then you go, the reason I don't enforce my boundaries is because I got a shame issue. Oh, thanks, Tim, for telling me about a new level, which is a new devil. And so you just get through one level of issues, and you find out you got 6 more issues that are connected to that. And you go, when am I going to be done growing? When am I going to be done dealing with this crap? This is not what I call fun. So you know what a lot of people do at that point? They say, I think the old life was better. And they relapse. What they don't realize is if they just hung in there, persevered for a little while, that line in the valley would start going up again. But part of what can happen when it's going down, so you changed and now all these things are happening, you start to feel a little bit scared and hopeless. That maybe this isn't going to work. You start to second guess yourself. Did I make the right decision? You get a little bit confused. What is normal? Am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? And so a lot of people think, you know what? It was a whole lot easier back the old way. And so what I want you to understand, recovery is about change. Change is hard. Change has many unseen or hidden things that will jump out and bite us, that all of a sudden make us wonder if the change was the right decision. So what I'm hoping as we go through this series is that you'll realize, okay, I got to change just about everything. When I change, I'm going to feel good, then I'm going to feel worse for a little while, but stick at it because it will begin to be worth it. I hope that will just help you to have enough of a picture of what to expect that when it happens, you can say, okay, Tim said this is going to happen, hang in there. And it'll be worth it. So I got thinking of what's a good story in the Bible that talks about a realistic approach to recovery. And I started going back in my mind to this book in the Bible that's right around the middle of the Bible called Nehemiah. It's not one that gets read very often because there's parts of it that are like super boring, like really boring. But a while back I was thinking about Nehemiah's story that is told, and I thought this is the perfect parallel to recovery. So what I want to do over the next few weeks is tell you about Nehemiah and kind of how his story parallels recovery. And I hope you're going to find it very instructive but encouraging as well. And just give you insight into your own troubles, your own struggles. So Nehemiah lived 2,500 years ago. And he lived around Jerusalem, and his hometown was the city of Jerusalem in Israel. But he wasn't living there at the beginning of the story. He had been taken captivity, and what had happened is the nation that conquered Israel had demolished the city. And Nehemiah is the guy that came along and started to rebuild the city, and he started by rebuilding the walls. The parallel is that if you look at recovery, it's much what Nehemiah looked at. He looked at a whole bunch of rubble. Your life has come to rubble. Everything is crumbled and fallen apart. And a lot of people at the beginning of recovery stand and look at all of the rubble of their life, and they go, where do I begin? This is a big, big job. So your relationships lie in ruin, your job lies in ruin, your finances are in ruin, your health is in ruin, just about everything is in ruin. And so recovery is all about rebuilding. But you're rebuilding from a pile of rubble. And so that's what we're going to be looking at with Nehemiah, because it gives us a very detailed, involved explanation of the problems that he encountered. And every problem that he encountered, we will encounter in recovery. He's going to go through days where he gets external opposition. He's going to go through days where his closest friends start to complain and become negative about him. He's going through days where he's very discouraged, days where he's stressed, days where he's tired and overwhelmed. All that we go through in recovery. And so I hope we can learn from him a little bit about our recovery and gain some tools for going through successfully in recovery. But I want to begin by giving a little background about Israel. Because Israel is a wonderful parallel to an addict in addiction. So what Israel had done over the last 1,000 years of their existence is they got close to God, and then they thought, you know what, the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. We think we'd be happier drifting away from God, doing our own thing. So they drifted away, and every time they encountered pain, negative, painful consequences for bad decisions. And so they would stay in those bad decisions until the pain got so bad, they go running back to God. And then they go along with God for a while and they say, you know what, grass is greener, and they drift away and do the same thing over and over again. Sounds like many people in recovery. They do well, things are going great, and then they start slacking off, drifting, and before you know it, relapse, and they stay there till the pain's so great they come back. And they have this cycle, like Israel did, of drifting, pain, coming back, repeat. And so what happened eventually, Israel got to a point where it didn't want to come back. They figured, what's the point? We're too far gone. And so at that point in time, this nation came in and conquered them because they're the weakest they'd ever been. Life looked the most hopeless that it had ever been because they were carried away as captives and slaves to a foreign country. And it was a painful, desperate, hopeless-looking time of their existence. And that's where we find Nehemiah. So their time away in this foreign country as prisoners was a 70-year period. And Nehemiah lived in that period. And right near the end of that period, his brother comes to visit him. And his brother has been down in Jerusalem. He's gone back to Israel to check it out. And so Nehemiah says to his brother, tell me what is going on back in Israel. And so this is what it says. My brother came to visit me. He had just arrived from Judah, which is Israel. I asked them about how things were going in Jerusalem, and they said to me, things are not going well. They are in great trouble and disgrace. So this is kind of how you might describe yourself at a bottom. The walls of Jerusalem have been torn down. The gates have been destroyed. by fire. In other words, devastation everywhere. Everything is a mess. Everything looks beyond repair. It looks hopeless. And so now I want to have you see what Nehemiah did next. Because what you're going to see next is where recovery begins. So recovery doesn't begin by doing stuff on the outside. It begins by something happening on the inside. And if you look at the 12 steps of AA or any 12-step group, what you're going to see in these initial things that Nehemiah did, you're going to start to see the first 4 steps unfolding in his life. So the first thing that he does, it says, when I heard this, I sat down and wept. In fact, for days I mourned and fasted. He was so brokenhearted, he couldn't even eat. And he cried for days. I suspect some of you have been there. You've been at a bottom, you've seen the mess, and you're brokenhearted. And you just cry, but you cry without a solution. You cry with a sense of overwhelming pain and hopelessness. And that's where Nehemiah begins, by that deep, deep sorrow. But then he turns it into a prayer. And so you look at the 12 steps. What's step 1? Powerless. That's what Nehemiah was feeling. What's step 2? I think I need a power outside of myself, greater than myself. I need some help here. And so what does he say? He says, I prayed, O God of heaven, who keeps his covenant of unfailing love with those who love and obey his commandments, listen to my prayer, look down, see me praying night and day for your people Israel. And many of you at your bottom have just begged God. You haven't had fancy words. You haven't wrapped it up nice and neat, like a neat little churchy prayer. You just say, God, I'm in a mess. Please help. I've heard that you're a loving God. Please, I hope you are. I need your help. And out of that desperation, prayer is born. Then the third thing that he does is significant. It says, he turns his prayer from begging to saying, I confess that we have sinned against you. And that simply meant we have stepped outside of what you said was healthy. We've been our own boss, done our own thing, even though it was very self-centered, even though it hurt other people. We wanted to do what we wanted to do. I own it. I messed up. Even my own family and I have sinned. So he doesn't say it's them that sinned, not me. He says, no, I'm part of that. We've sinned terribly by not obeying your commands that you gave us through your servant Moses. And he's saying this, we did it knowing how to live. We did it knowing what was healthy, but we chose to live unhealthy. We chose in the face of all of this information to say, I still want to do it my way. And so what he is doing is accepting responsibility for his part. He is looking at his side of the road. And he's saying, I'm the problem. He's not blaming. He's not trying to minimize what he did. He's not trying to rationalize what he's done. He is saying, I did it and I am so sorry. For the first time, many addicts come to this place where they truly repent. And that doesn't mean just feeling sorry about what you did. It's owning it and saying, I got to change. I have to do this differently. But there's a second part here that I want you to understand. Step 1, 2, 3. I'm powerless. I need power greater than myself. Step 3, I'm going to trust. I'm going to turn my will and my life over. I am going to connect with this God. I can't do this on my own. I need the help of other people, but I need a spiritual power as well. And that's what Nehemiah was saying was this. This is too big of a mess for me to fix on my own. Now just imagine that Winnipeg was totally demolished. Every house, every building. And you were standing at Portage in Maine looking at nothing but rubble. And you are saying, where do I begin to rebuild this city? Do you imagine how powerless you would feel? Overwhelmed? There's just so much work and I'm just one person. And Nehemiah is saying that very thing, but he's saying, okay, God, I need you. And I surrender to you. And then he says, how can I know God's going to help me? And I love this and I want you to get it. Because a lot of you have prayed to God in the past and it didn't seem like God did anything to help you. And you're not sure whether you can trust Him again. So here's what he says. Please remember your promise. So he's saying, I'm hanging on to something you promised. And your promise was this. If you're unfaithful, which they were to me, I will scatter you. So in other words, we're in enemy territory as prisoners of war. But that's because you kept your promise. So you were faithful to a promise. But you also said, if we return to you and we repent and obey and live by your commands, then you will bring us back. So you've kept part one of your promise. Now I'm trusting you to keep part two. We are turning our hearts back to you. Now please help us rebuild our lives and our city. And he's hanging on to that. In Romans 8, God says this. That He will take everything in your life. If you surrender to Him, He'll take the bad, all the mess, and He'll turn it into a positive. That's His promise. And so what you're doing in recovery is saying, okay, God, I'm not going to sit on the couch and just say, I trust you, clean up the mess and rebuild the city. I got to give it 100%. I got to work hard, but I can't just work hard without your help. And so we're going to work as a team now, and I'm going to trust your promise that if we surrender to you, you're going to help us rebuild this city and our lives. And that is why I do what I do. Because if it was just me trying to help addicts, I'd be kind of stuck feeling. But God has said, if you will surrender, I'll take all the bad stuff that you've done, all the mess you created, and it's going to be painful and it's going to be hard, but I will gradually turn that into positives in your life. And I've watched it happen. Now, it doesn't mean all of a sudden everything's magically fixed and that you don't have any consequences to deal with. There's still consequences, but He turns in the consequences, He changes you. He doesn't necessarily change all your external circumstances. He starts by changing who you are. And that's where the healing has to begin. So, Nehemiah prays. Now, what he was the cupbearer for the king of Persia, which is modern Iran. And to be a cupbearer, that meant that you tasted everything the king drank. So if anybody tried to poison him, who died? The cupbearer, not the king. So the king would only pick to be his cupbearer his most trusted friend in the world. So what you see is Nehemiah, he was a super big shot in Iran. Now he gets this report from his brother about Jerusalem, where that's his nationality, that's where his parents live, and he wants to help out. But what does he do? He can't just go to the king one day and say, I quit. He could get killed for that, believe it or not, in that culture. So he prays for 4 months. He sits there saying, God, I want help, but I'm not sure the next step. I'm not sure where to begin. And so it says, early the following spring, I was serving the king his wine, and I had never appeared sad in his presence before. Do you realize that in that culture, you had to be happy all the time in front of the king? If you were sad or angry, he could have you executed. That's what he did. And so Nehemiah is so overwhelmed by the mess in Jerusalem that he can't even bring himself to be happy that day. That's how overwhelmingly painful his emotions were. And some of you get that. And so he comes on the job and he's sad, and the king says, what's wrong with you? And immediately he kind of panics because you're not supposed to do that. And utters a very quick, quiet prayer and says, God, help. And he tells the king all about the mess in Jerusalem. And the king says, I want you to go and help. I will even pay your way to go and help. I will even provide materials to start building a wall. And I will send a bit of the army to keep you safe, because you are going to be in a war zone and you're going to need safe keeping. So I will protect you. Imagine when Nehemiah sitting there going, wow, how did that just happen? Is it odd or is it God? And that's what many of you have gone through, these weird coincidences that out of the blue, something opens up. But what I like about this was Nehemiah had to sit for a little while. There wasn't an instant fix for the problem. He had to go and just wait. And we don't like that. But then once he gets there, the first thing he does, and this is your step 4, is I arrived in Jerusalem, and 3 days later I slipped out during the night. That's because there's enemies everywhere. And I went all around the city inspecting the wall. And what he was doing was this. I can't begin recovery unless I know the damage. I can't begin recovery unless I know what the problems are. I can't begin recovery unless I know what needs to be done. I can't begin recovery unless I do an inventory. I can't begin recovery and expect to succeed unless I diagnose the problem correctly and diagnose the solution correctly. And that's what we're doing in this series. And that's what Nehemiah did. So let me say this. One of the things Jesus said was this. Don't go into battle unless you counted how much it's going to cost you. And what he is saying is just don't go in there with this fantasy in your mind saying, I'm going to go into battle and I'm going to be a knight in shining armor. Nothing bad's going to happen to me. Everything will be fine, wonderful. It'll be a lot of fun. Jesus is saying, get real. Realize when you take on a task what it's going to require of you. And that's what Nehemiah is doing. He says, I want to rebuild this city, but I got to figure out exactly what needs fixed. How much material is needed, how much manpower is needed, how much time it's going to take, all of the obstacles, all of the things that are going to become part of making this happen. I got to get it figured out. Because if I don't, we're all going to start with lots of enthusiasm, and then as soon as it starts getting hard, we're all going to quit because we didn't count the cost. And so recovery begins with a hard attitude. I need you, God. I surrender. I trust you. And then it goes to an inventory. What's this going to take? I need a realistic roadmap. Because if I don't, I'm setting myself up to fail.